Welcome back to the Worship Keys Coach podcast. We had such a great time last time that we have Derek back again. So Derek Hughes here in Nashville, Tennessee, sharing with us some awesome worship key stuff today, talking all things tracks, MD, click, track building. So we had him on the very first episode, and he's here for episode 2 as well, part 2 with Derek Hughes.
Yeah, great to be back.
Yeah, man, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm excited to dive into some nerdy multi-tracks and Ableton stuff. I always love the chance to get to talk about how Ableton is superior to Mainstage.
Oh, goodness. Well, I let it leak last episode that I'm a Mainstage user, so that's okay. You know,
it's okay. I'll pray for you.
I love it. So tell me about Ableton. Maybe you don't know Ableton. Like, what is Ableton? What are tracks? Why do I need tracks? How do we use these in church? Just give us a full dive into this, man.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, Ableton's a DAW, which stands for something.
Digital audio
Digital
workstation.
audio, yeah. I blanked on what the D stood for.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's a place, like I use it for recording vocals, mixing songs, mastering songs, but also it has a live feature, and you can have pre-recorded tracks that you press play on when you start a song, and you can have that routed to...
Or some people get so mad that they do fire it, and they're like, we're done.
You're done, yeah. Which I have some great tips for that. But yeah, it's a great way to just accent what your band is already playing on Sunday morning or Wednesday night, whatever it is. It's a way to increase the excellence level in a lot of ways. There's a lot of uses for it. I think I've been a part of bands that didn't use it and sounded amazing. I've been a part of bands that did use it and sounded just as good, maybe better, because we had a little bit of extra leeway with some instruments. I've had bands improperly use it and sound worse than the bands without it. It really, you can't just like load them in and then hit play and it just sounds great with your band. Like, you have to know what your band is made up of. If you have a bass player playing, you don't need the bass guitar track in. You can leave that muted, or you can take it out of your multi-track, whether you're using like multitracks.com and you're buying those stems and you're bringing them into Ableton. And stems are the like individual tracks. You'll have like electric guitar left and right and keys 1, 2, 3. You'll bring those into your DAW, whether that's Ableton or something else, or you'll use playback, which is like, I think Multitracks branded.
Right, their app.
Yeah, which is great. I'd say Ableton is just a more advanced, in-depth way of doing things. Yes, you could get more complicated and do a little bit different stuff. You could like add effects and things like that. Playback is more probably straightforward, where it's just like easy user experience. Someone that isn't super experienced with recording music could very easily get an iPad, get that app, and press play on something. If they want to take out the guitar, they can take it out with muting it. If they want to start at chorus 2, they can do that. So a lot of the things that I program in Ableton, which take hours, you can actually do really quickly with playback. And then there's some things with playback that, say your song isn't on multitracks, say it's your church's album that you wrote and you're going to start playing it and you want to use the tracks from the recording, well, you may not be able to use that in playback unless they've changed that feature.
Well, that's where Loop Community comes in.
Right. I've heard good things about that. So then
I'm not sponsored by Loop Community at all. I get no
But you've made
commissions.
some loops, right?
Yeah.
So guys like you can make a guitar patch for a Hillsong song, and someone can buy that and put it into a playback.
Right. Yeah.
And so, but if you don't have that, and if it's your church's thing, then you can grab it and put anything into Ableton.
Right. What I love about playback and then Loop Community's Prime app is that you don't need a dedicated other MacBook or computer to run that. Like, you could run it literally on your iPhone now,
right,
or your iPad, which the CPU is great on those, and it's usually not going to crash. A lot of people use iPad, with the playback.
Oh yeah.
And it's more user friendly, for people that
and
don't
it's discreet too. Like, it doesn't take up a lot of space. And yeah, I'm a huge Ableton advocate, and I would tell churches to use playback instead, just because of how easy it is to get into it.
Yeah.
Ableton, you're going to be spending hours and hours reading the manual, watching videos, trying to figure it out. Playback, I think, is a very simple, accessible way to get into doing tracks. So if your church isn't doing that, then I would definitely look into playback by Multitracks
or
and Loop Community.
Or Prime Loop Community.
Prime.
I think if you're comparing Prime and the playback, I would go with Prime.
Okay.
If you disagree with me, you can comment in the comment section. If you're watching this on YouTube, feel free to disagree and make a comment. But I love it because now they're always updating the apps. But for a while, that there were some crossover things that you couldn't do in Multitracks playback versus Prime. And then also they had a pad option within Prime, which I think eventually did that within playback. But there were some like different MIDI capabilities that you could do.
Oh, cool.
And so like you can MIDI map pretty much all your stems to your faders if you wanted to.
Nice.
There's like a oh no button, like if we get off, you can like do like a 10-second fade out for all the tracks.
Right, that's huge.
All that stuff with like MIDI mapping.
Actually haven't used playback or Prime. So I couldn't speak to it.
You wouldn't need to. I mean, you're using Ableton, so
yeah, that's right.
You're there. But,
I love using Ableton, but even as someone that knows it well, even that, it takes a lot of time to load it in versus that where it's just like there, so much easier. But I don't have as much experience with tracks for the last couple of years because actually the guy that I played with for the last few years doesn't use tracks. So that's like kind of another approach. You're going to have people that don't want it. We didn't need it. The band was all incredible Nashville musicians that really knew their lane, like I was talking about in that last episode, like really knowing where you fit with your piano and with your guitar. If you're playing in the right octaves and the right notes, like you can sound amazing.
Yeah, that's good.
And a lot of the times, one of the main reasons why churches will use playback, which is totally valid, is if your team is just not super experienced or your players aren't really great yet. Like if they're playing electric guitar, have the other electrics in there with it and like lift it up, kind of thicken that mix a little bit so that other lead guitar is playing the line still there in the house.
Right.
And the electric guitar player can be playing with them. Or, Elevation song that has 4 electric guitars on the playback or the loop community like track.
Yeah.
When you just have one dude, then you can have like some of that fill up the mix, which is a huge thing. But we played with that band, and it's so funny because after services, people will be like, man, your tracks in the house just sounded so good. And it would always put a smirk on Brett's face because he's like so anti-tracks, which is just kind of his thing.
Tell us about the people that are anti-tracks. Why are they anti-tracks?
He's just like a good old-fashioned, grew up in a small town church, I think, likes the idea of not being too like locked into something, which I can talk more about that. Like there's pros and cons of both ways, I think. But I think that he just trusts his team to do a really good job. And he just doesn't like to get into all the like technology stuff and dig into it. We use click and cues, but we just didn't use any tracks. And
cool.
Part of the reason was because as a keys player, my job was to play all the parts perfectly, like create the synth sounds and all the Jesus culture and elevation stuff. Like I had to actually hand make those, which took a lot of time, which sometimes I was like, can't we just use tracks? But
because if you notice in the modern worships like music, I don't feel like it used to be this way in like 2002, 2005.
No.
It was like we were kids. But like, now there's so many layers within the synths. There's the ARPs are going, the synths are going.
Right.
There's a synth line that's doubling the electric, but the piano's just doing this. I've recognized too, even with bands that don't do any tracks, I would still wish, unless the bass player was really on it too, or you programmed bass note, like the sub bass synth line is amazing.
Oh yeah.
Oh my goodness! Like the first, some
huge.
of those first choruses that come in where you don't necessarily have the bass guitar in it, but you have the sub bass in, and it just starts rumbling in the room. It's like Prince of God just fell or something. I love a good sub bass in your tracks. I mean, a lot of bass players will have that too, or have that programmed within Ableton to trigger different bass notes. I love that. A lot of people overlook that too because you think about the electrics or a lot of the keys layers, but that sub bass is like killer.
Sub bass is beautiful. I always run my Nord 88 key. My last octave is always a 4 sub bass.
Nice.
Or like some sort of like really low frequency instrument. And so no matter what I play, my piano patches won't hit that. I like program it to not go that far down.
That's good.
So that only certain things that I choose will happen with my like far left hand.
Love it.
So that way, if like with his band when we didn't have a sub bass, before our bass player actually got like a sub fatty Moog board, I would do all the sub bass stuff too. So
That's awesome.
I appreciate tracks too. I'll sometimes be playing like 8 patches in one song.
Yeah.
And the way I choose to set it up is kind of like the Ian McIntosh style, where I don't like create a patch and then when it hits chorus, it like automatically with MIDI changes to my other patch. I manually like click and move my knobs, and like that's just it's more fun for me. It's like I'm driving a car, like operating like a spaceship. Like it just feels so fun. And you never know, you might play the chorus 2 of a song way differently one night than another. Right. And so the fact that I can manipulate my sounds based on the size of the band, the size of the room for EQ purposes. And I even have like EQs on all of my patches that whenever I go into a room, I'll play my piano. I know what it should sound like. And so if it sounds weird in a certain frequency, I can actually bring it down or up myself. Make sure that if you're doing that, you're talking with the sound guy.
That's right. Yeah.
Telling him that you're doing that. And
leave that to the sound man. Yeah.
I do all that before, but just because there's a certain way that I know that my piano sounds. A lot of guitarists will be the same way. They'll tweak their EQ settings when they're setting up. But
we need to have a whole episode about sound men. How do we very graciously
approach
get
those
along
conversations
with sound men? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, you do have to have a great relationship with sound guy
or woman.
Yeah, and with tracks too. Like
yes,
and that's the thing with tracks is like I said, you may not need like the bass guitar if you have a bass guitarist, and if your guitarist is playing, it's nice to know what instruments you plan on playing so that you can mute things that you don't need. If I'm going to play the grand piano sound, then I'm going to obviously mute the grand piano in there. But if for some reason I decide I don't want to play the grand piano on that song, I want to play the organ just because I want to, or because I think maybe my organ sounds better than the patch that's available, then I'll go ahead and play it myself, knowing if I'm the one writing tracks or the drummer's running it or whoever in the booth is running it, knowing what stems are on there and available, and then having that conversation beforehand saying, hey, I'm going to play this, this, and this.
Absolutely.
So like sending that out to your band if they have access to like a Dropbox with the stems or whatever it is. I don't know how that works. Because I was the one running tracks, I always had access to everything. I could say, hey, mute keys 2 and keys 4. I'm going to play those myself.
Right.
Or if it's like, hey, I'm playing keys 2, but just turn it down a little bit, and I'm going to duplicate over it with my tone, and it's going to like really thicken that patch up. Because sometimes I like to just accent what the tracks are doing.
Right. Now, expound upon that, because a lot of worship leaders' churches, they're sending 2 signals out, right? They have clicks so they can go back and click and cues and go back to your ears, and the rest is going all to the sound man, everything, right?
Yeah.
So you're talking about when you're splitting them out, 8 different tracks, right?
Yeah.
Or 16 or whatever. A lot of times 8, you get your click and your cues, and then you got all of electrics, all of keys, or maybe 2 for main keys, aux keys, organ, and then you got some sub bass, and you got some percussion, right? And so that's when you're splitting it out with a interface similar to the interface behind us. You can't see it, but Scarlett 18i20.
I think it's got 8 XLR outputs.
Okay.
Maybe.
No, it's 8. I think it's 8 quarter inch.
Yeah.
8 quarter inch. So you can just
Yeah, so you can get a snake. I would do 2 keys, 2 guitars, a vocals probably for like BGVs, a bass, just a solo. I don't usually split those because it just can get kind of muddy.
Right.
And then like a percussion, you could either split stereo with the last 2, or you could do like some other aux instrument that I'm not thinking of right now, but that's probably the way I would split it. And then anything falling in keys like piano, organs, synths, all that you could put in there, because then you can still, strings can sometimes be their own if you have enough outputs.
True.
Because that's another thing with strings is like, if you're playing a song that has like cello and all these like really crazy like dramatic orchestral instruments, and you have a 4-piece band, it's almost like more distracting that it sounds so good.
Right.
Because it's like, where's that violin coming from? Now, like our church at one point, we had a violin player. And so when you have a violin player, I feel okay about having the orchestral instruments in there, because most people's ears out in the crowd don't know the difference between certain stringed instruments.
Right.
So they see a violin player and they just assume what they're hearing is like all of them.
Right.
Which is great. That's kind of the part of tracks, is like that it augments and helps what the band's playing. But it's never like distractingly higher than I think. And that's where it can be weird. If you don't have a guitar player up there and you hear these ripping guitar solos.
Absolutely.
It's like, yeah, in that case, I usually mute those. Or I'll turn them down to where the piano player might be more heard that's like actually up there.
So what you're saying is tracks are used to enhance. Everything, not to replace anything. Not to, take someone else's spot. Right. It's meant to enhance everything that you already have going on.
But I will say, I recently played with a band from Nashville, and they're a duo. Husband's a drummer, wife's a singer, and this camp just so happened to have a certain budget, and they were able to bring on one other person. So they brought me, and I ran tracks, did MD, sang BGVs, sang leads sometimes. So it was a 3-piece band. And they wanted us to have a full sound.
Okay.
And so I would, so in that case, I had electric guitars playing. But at that point, it's obvious that like, hey, we're doing our best here.
Right, that's
with
true.
What we have to work with.
That's true.
But we're giving him a very high level experience because the tracks sound amazing.
Yeah.
Whenever you split them out that way, the sound guy has the ability to push the percussion down because we have a real drummer, but bring the electrics hot. Or bring the keys down. If I'm playing a lot of patches, he can dial back the multi-track keys.
That's good.
And I think too, like when your tracks are so hot and heavy, you have to have those redundancy things in place. And so like you said, having on, I think you said Prime, how it has like the 10-second fade out.
Yeah.
On Ableton, I do that on everything too. Or I don't hit spacebar because I just cuts it off.
Right,
I have an end button and it'll like fade everything out.
Absolutely.
Because if your pads and all these things that are filling up the low end and the mid range just leave the mix, it sounds like a whole different song.
Right.
So like with like multi-tracks, a lot of the time they'll have like pads in the tracks. Well, if you're a keys player, what I like to do is I like to have those drones and pads on my end. Usually I like to play them and I mute the ones on multi-tracks. Some people might do the opposite. But like you always have the ability with the press of a button to turn on one of your like drones. Every note of the keyboard, I have a drone that'll just play in that key.
And you're talking about probably like down here, right?
Yeah, I have it like
last.
I either map it to my keyboard or map it to my actual MIDI controller that's separate.
Okay, yeah.
I'll have a separate controller for that. And if I press a button, it'll play an A drone.
Yeah.
And so if my tracks just decided, or we got off the tracks, or we played it in the wrong key, or something crazy happened, and we have to cut the tracks, I can fire that, and there's still like that big bed of pads and stuff going on. So if you don't have that like redundancy, or a lot of people are like, well, we don't use tracks because we don't like to be locked to a grid, and we want to be able to be free in worship and wherever God's leading us, which is totally how I love to worship.
Right.
And circuit riders is like all about that. That's where I learned a lot of just the prophetic worship and just playing whatever comes to mind, or praying over a certain thing, or writing a song on the spot. Like that happened a lot. Figuring out a chord progression to a song you've never heard. You finish your song, tracks fade out because the pad only goes as long as the song, right? Unless you trigger a way to loop it. But like that ends, and say you want to keep that click, you can like have your click stay, but I can like turn on a pad and like keep the energy of the song up and keep playing. And then whenever we fire the next track, it never sunk way down or went up.
Right.
And I have control of my volume of my drones too.
Absolutely.
So I can manually fade out and in.
Absolutely.
If it's a harsh key change, then I can manually do that stuff.
Absolutely.
A lot of people are under the misconception that tracks really lock you in. But I think if you're also mixing that with a software keys player, that's kind of like your manual tracks guy.
Absolutely.
And so you can really be more fluid with your volumes and what patches are playing at what time.
Absolutely.
And so I think that's a cool way to do it, is using tracks, but also using a skilled keys player, or like learning those patches and how to use effects to augment the multi-tracks.
Yes.
And vice versa.
Like if you have someone like yourself come in there as well and also run tracks, it's basically another instrument.
Yeah.
And I know, I can't speak with Ableton as much. I've run Ableton a few times, but with running Prime for Loop Community, I have it mapped out on my MIDI controller. There's a repeat button, and every section's broken down, right, in their app. And so when it gets to, let's say, after that second verse, or after the last chorus going into the bridge, if the worship leader starts to pray or sing something else, decide he wants to read a little bit of scripture or whatever, I can press that repeat button and it loops that instrumental before the bridge. But of course, if you don't have anyone who knows about the tracks, how to run them, like yourself, you wouldn't be able to cue that up. If you have something that can control those tracks, then you can actually still flow like you want to sometimes and be able to do that. But then again, that'd require you to know your worship leader real well, know their equipment real well, and have everything prepared, you know?
And that's where having a great MD comes in place too. The keys player, the worship leader, the guitarist might be the MD, but like someone also cueing in, all right, he's done praying or he's done talking to the congregation. 1, 2, chorus. And that way the tracks guy knows that he's got to turn off the loop and go back to the chorus. Everyone knows that they're about to go into that chorus chord. So MD can come in handy a lot too, which is just someone on a mic that isn't going into the house. The mic is just going into the in-ears of the band, and that can make a big difference. Or even just, say you don't have the in-ears and you're just using hand signals. You got your C, you got your bridge, you got your 1. That's what's great about the number system too, is you change the chord progression of a bridge because you've been playing it for 10 minutes, or or you have a guitarist that forgot the chord for the bridge and they're kind of playing, like looking at you like,
what are we doing?
You can be like, give the 6, 4, 5, 1 just on stage, and then if everyone speaks Nashville number system, you're good to go.
Absolutely.
But I've been a part of plenty of bands where I've been the one that forgot what was coming up.
What's coming up here?
Because we played like 20 songs.
Yeah.
And I'm so tired, and I just forgot.
Right.
And keys, you can't really mess up. You're like the person holding it down.
Right.
And a lot of times it's just you and the vocalist in those down moments. And so you kind of need to know your chords, which comes with practicing the songs, which I talked about in that first episode. The more you can practice, the more you can really just flow along with what's going on.
If you're setting up your tracks at your church and you want to go simple, because sometimes life happens and you need things up and running fast, right? So just splitting out 2 tracks, one for click and cues, one for all your tracks. Now, if that works and you don't have to take up some more time to split it out, why change it? Maybe we can talk a little bit about the advantages of splitting them out, because you mentioned the sound man. The sound man loves more control. Well, it depends on the sound man.
Right.
If you obviously are not confident in your sound engineer, you would obviously feed him everything, and then maybe mix it within your DAW, within your software, then your app. But if you have a great engineer who knows what they're doing, the advantage of it, right, is that you can send that sub bass to the engineer. The engineer knows to send just that signal to all the subs in the room, cut it off at a certain frequency, which your stem should already be doing that anyway, but they can control that and feed it into the right channels. If you are running a house where it's not all together, where you have
every room's going to sound different too. You
Absolutely.
That's why you can't just press play on a multi-track.
Yes.
And expect the sub bass to be at a perfect level for that room.
Yes.
You have to bring the sub bass down. If you are running mono, which I would never recommend mono, just because there's so much happening like in the stereo space left and right with guitars. It just won't ever sound that great. I would recommend, if you don't have a bigger budget for a bigger board, to do the split that we were talking about. You can just get 2 DIs. You can do 2 stereo DIs. You can do a left. You can get those like aux cords that go left and right, like click cues for 1 DI running to your computer, and then you can have a left and right for the stereo tracks, and then you can still have like technically a 4 channel. That's what I would recommend, is at least getting 4. But if you can't, then you have to do the mixing within the playback app or Ableton or the Prime.
Absolutely.
You have to pull down the sub bass or pull down the guitars on that front, per room, which your sound guy will know.
Absolutely. But, trust your sound man.
Yeah.
But I do have to stop you there. So you're talking about stereo versus mono, and it's such a hot topic. It can be among many audio engineers. You're in the studio. We're in your studio right now. Derek, here's a piano, and your desk is over there, and you got your mixing space. When you're preparing for tracks, you're composing for a movie or whatever, you're listening with your monitors right here or your headphones, and you got everything stereo. We have two ears for a reason. But a lot of live sound, they run mono because you have people not in the ideal situation, because when you're in a studio, you're in the sweet spot, left and right, boom, you're here, this nice equidistance where you're hearing everything stereo. And then musicians on stage also are in a good sweet spot because they're there with in-ears, and so they can hear their effects really well. And then stereo is really good because for broadcast, when people are listening on their computer, even if it's just one speaker or their iPhone, it can still be stereo, or whatever on their headphones at home. The stereo is really important for your effects, and people dial it in, especially keys people too. We have stereo effects, but especially electrics.
Yeah.
But the actual house mix, there are very few exceptions. But I found that a lot of the spaces, they just sum it all to mono because physics, you can't get you can't get everyone dead middle in the room.
Everyone's going to be sitting in the booth.
So not everyone's going to get that sweet spot. So I feel like yes and no to stereo versus mono thing. Definitely give it all stereo.
Yeah.
And have it, if you can, ears back stereo, broadcast stereo. But unless your room is really ideal for stereo, even at the stage, you have filler boxes, so they're just mono.
Yeah.
It wouldn't work out unless every single person, like a silent disco, putting on headphones, and you're a DJ,
Yeah.
and, we both DJ, so we understand that those silent discos, but not everyone's going to have headsets. So
Right.
I feel like, stereo, good to give out.
That's true.
But for the room, for the engineer,
right.
it's just going to go mono.
And it also is kind of nice for the musicians, though. Because we do have headphones, we can choose to put like guitars in one ear and our guitar that we're playing in the right ear or something.
Right.
Which I'll do a lot of that too. And so, I mean, all of this really depends on the room, the church, the budget, things like that. And there's no one shoe fits all. One size fits all for any of these ideas. It's really, you have to figure out what works best for your church. But I would say give tracks a shot.
That's awesome. What advice would you give to a brand new person learning tracks? Now, Ableton is the standard for professional tracks running. And if you were to learn Ableton or something else.
Ableton is funny because I learned whenever I was 16. And the guy that I learned from, I remember whenever I was like, hey, I don't know how this works. Can you help me? And he's like, I'm going to tell you what the person that taught me how to do Ableton is. Open the manual and start reading.
Oh, man.
Because that's the only way you're going to get it.
And this guy was a med student, so Derek knows about studying.
So, I cracked it open, and it was very helpful. It took a long time to learn it, but super helpful because if you have any interest in like getting into production or writing for your own church, you can get a guitar and a vocal, plug in a little interface, and you can get a great demo sounding if your church starts writing songs.
Absolutely.
Ableton's great because it has recording purposes and it also has the live multi-track running purposes.
Right.
And so it's great to be able to do both in there.
Absolutely.
But just getting into tracks, I'd say don't let it freak you out. A lot of people will feel like man versus machine, or like they'll feel like they have to do exactly what the track does. But I think in a lot of those, you can grab a chorus and duplicate it.
Oh, yeah.
Or you can like still make it your arrangement.
Oh, for sure.
And so I'd say make it your arrangement, and maybe try it at like a rehearsal, a few rehearsals before you use it on Sunday morning.
Right.
The whole point is that we're eliminating distraction.
Absolutely.
And so if your tracks are failing or whatever because you didn't really practice it, then you're just like, well, tracks didn't work for me. Like, it doesn't work for our church.
Right.
It's like, well, did you give it a fair shot? Did you do it in places with low pressure to really kind of learn it and take the time to watch some videos on it?
Absolutely.
So that's what I would say is give yourself some low pressure rehearsals or times to work on it and practice it before you actually bring it into the Sunday morning.
I think a lot of it is they're scared of technology. Churches or individuals, you just might be a little fearful on just the tech side of things.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of churches are.
I guarantee you there's a 12-year-old at your church somewhere that knows iPads
there you go.
very well. Probably like a 7-year-old at this point.
I do know some churches that they actually fire the tracks from the front of house, from where the console is. Like the sound man is the person running the tracks.
Yep, which all that takes is the MD on stage that like knows where the band's at and what they're trying to do.
Right.
Cueing that person in the back and that has headphones with the band.
Right.
Because you still want the band, the worship leader, to be the one running what's happening. You don't want the guy in the booth just like saying, all right, we're going to the next song. Here we go. Like the worship leader is the quarterback here. He's the one leading this. They're the person that is knowing when they want to stay on something longer or when they might say something. And if you have some random person that's not in with what's happening.
That's right.
So I would still make that person, if it is in the back being triggered, I would say just have them on headset. Someone on stage is still like calling that shot.
Absolutely. That's good, man. They actually do make foot switches for cues as well. Speaking of firing in the tracks, like if you're a worship leader on stage with an acoustic guitar or just vocals or whatever, and you're on the front of the stage leading, they actually make little foot pedals where you can map out. Have you seen these?
Where you map what?
So it's MIDI mapped back to wherever is running the tracks.
Oh, yeah, to change the song with your foot.
And so you can just foot pedal, and I've seen a few people use those, and so you just boom for song 1, second, 2, 3, 4.
Yep.
So if you do like to have that control, and maybe you're not at that point where you can rely on anyone else consistently, and you want to be the one to fire the tracks, you could...
I know a lot of churches that do that, where maybe like they're a youth group where not a lot of them are experienced musicians that they trust to also run the technology. The worship leader can just kind of do all of it from just a touch of an iPad or a touch of a foot switch. I even have I have a Hotshot box radial thing mix it, and it's a 2-channel, so I can have lead vocals coming out and then hit this button and it fires the other channel, which lets me just talk to the band.
Nice, yes.
And so I can do that as a keys player. When I'm like singing BGVs or leading songs, I can have that pedal. If I'm also the MD and I can talk just into that. We use it for our wedding band too.
That's awesome.
So if we can be like, hey, don't start the song, the bride's not here yet. And not let that project into the speakers so that everyone hears it. Because it works for, basically that's a situation where it's someone's mic that sings as well.
Right.
MD mic would be just a mic that goes in to the ears, but if you have someone singing that's also the MD, get that radial hot shot pedal, and even the worship leader can do it.
That's awesome.
Sometimes it's a little awkward to be like, for the worship leader to be mouthing words and nothing's coming out. So it's usually a little bit more visually pleasing for it to be someone in the back that people aren't looking at.
Right.
But if you have to, I know some worship leaders that just put the MD mic behind them.
Right.
And they're trying to turn around and then talk into that mic and come back. Either way, there's a lot of ways to do it, and there's a lot of ways to make tracks work for your church.
I know we're going to wrap it up soon, but talk a little bit about gear here for a moment. I know we talked a little bit briefly, and there's definitely a ton of resources we can link. As far as just like take an example of an interface, right? You can go out of the headphones of a computer, right? Versus going in an interface. Can you tell just like a little bit of importance of why do we need to go out of the interface?
Yeah.
Other than just the iPad or the computer.
Well, one would be latency, which is a lag in you playing a note and it coming out of the speakers. A lot of the interfaces reduce latency. It has a mechanism in it that reduces that milliseconds time, and so you can reduce latency. You can also, it obviously lets you have multiple outputs. Your laptop is only a 1-channel output, or your stereo. Yeah. So you can plug it in with USB and have up to however many these days, especially with the optical cable too. You can do whatever with Dante.
Yeah, with Dante.
Dante is awesome.
Dante is an audio over IP network, by the way.
Crazy.
So yeah, it's insane. It's basically a whole network of inputs and outputs, and you can basically tell it where to go, all the ins and all the outs, and you run it all through a network switch.
Definitely more advanced.
Yeah.
But for that worship thing that I was telling you about in Massachusetts, where I was the keys player, and plus like the full band, I showed up with this giant interface, had all these snakes, and this was also the kind of service where they had like these skits. It was for youth, so they had these skits put together that required the stage, so we had to strike the stage before and after every set that we played.
Oh, wow.
And if you know anything about like a keys rig, it's a software keys rig. It can sometimes be pretty big.
Oh, yeah.
And so I showed up with all these snakes and these things, and the guy...
I didn't know you were a snake handler, man.
Yeah. And on like week 2, they had a sound guy that was like, we have Dante back here, right? And I was like, what's that? I didn't even know what it was.
Where's Dante? I want to meet him.
And he said, unplug all those XLRs and hand me all those cables. And he's like, here's an Ethernet cable. Plug that in. He's like, you're good. I was like, what?
It's crazy. It's crazy. There are studios too, production studios, where they basically have like Studio A, Studio B, and across the halls, and you just connect it through Ethernet. What back in the day, you'd run all of the individual 32 channels or whatever it is, so that both studios can have both channels running simultaneously. But with Dante or audio over IP network, Ethernet cable for everything. So that's amazing. Like what Derek's saying, you could just literally run an Ethernet cable out. Now, of course, you have to have a license though for each device that runs it. So as long as they put in their code in your device, you get onto the network, just like almost like you would for Wi-Fi. You get onto that network and make sure it sees it and knows where it's going. But you got to have a tech guru that knows what's going on.
Yeah.
We're talking about this in 2024. Who knows what's going to happen?
Right.
2 years from now. So
Dante 2.0.
Yeah,
that's going to be.
Yeah, and there's Dante certifications. You can learn all about Dante. It's a pretty awesome tool. Eliminates a lot of cables. Very clean.
Right. Yeah, I know a lot of big churches use it. I think you can even use it to kind of like, say like a mega church will use it to run the audio. They might have like an overflow room.
Yeah.
And so the audio will like fire at the same time for both rooms that are just connected by an Ethernet cable.
Yeah, it's crazy. I know you can do lighting and Pro Presenter and tracks all together.
Yep, which sync. Is also awesome with Ableton.
That's awesome.
You can actually put slides in Ableton and have, if you were using Ableton, you can actually put all your Pro Presenter stuff in Ableton. So whenever it goes to the chorus and it goes to it's triggered by beats. So it's never a little slow like the volunteer at your church who loves running slides. It's just a little late on the slide pressing or forgets or gets one wrong. It never is wrong and it fires right away, which is a cool thing with it.
Loop Community has that as well.
Oh, cool.
They have full integration with like lighting and audio and Pro Presenter. But here's the thing: I haven't actually programmed all that, but I've heard reviews where if you go into that mode, it's hard to get like out of it in real time. Say you get through your whole worship set, it was awesome, everything worked perfectly, and then the sermon's coming, and you're like, go to the next slide. I've heard that I don't know if they've worked out the kinks with that.
Yeah.
But, switching between the automatic versus the manual.
Some coding resolves on that.
Exactly. But yeah, running tracks it's really endless possibility of like staying organized and keeping things really tight. If you're at a mega church specifically, ClickTracks can help you stay on time. If you have
stage that's huge.
If your pastor's saying, hey, worship's been going on 50 minutes every Sunday morning, we really need to get it down to 30, you can literally map it out with your tracks. If you're trying to get on time, you can definitely get closer with using tracks.
Well, and I know a lot of churches that, like, say a satellite church where they have 10 locations or more, they all have to be finished at the same time so that whenever they cue the sermon, that all the different churches are on at the same time.
Yeah.
So I've known churches like James River that I played at that whenever the drummer at the main campus fires Ableton, all the other ones are firing at the same time. And on Planning Center, if you have it all, your timeline, the flow, you can see what time, 9:35 a.m., which some churches you have to do that because you have to have people out for the next service. Some churches may have the luxury of they can extend worship however they want.
Right.
But it kind of gives you the ability to cater to both.
Absolutely.
There's tools for a lot of that.
That's amazing. My first experience running tracks was actually it was in church, but my first experience actually making tracks was for a show band. It's for show choir.
Oh, cool.
So what I did was I went through loopcommunity.com, and we didn't use it for the performance, but it was all for practice. What we had is the choir was saying, hey, the band keeps speeding up, which does happen. If it's exciting and it's a fast, tempo's at 140, we keep pushing for long, we're at 160.
Yeah. And
there's a choir dancing, they're saying, whoa, y'all are going way too fast. So we started practicing with a click. For one, I dumped in the whole recording, our reference recording for the band, into the ears and in the click. So then when we first introduced the song to everyone, we could, fire it off, hear it as we go. And I could put cues in there for different sections of the songs. And we could practice all in sync so that when we practice with the choir, we turn the tracks off. We just play with the click and the cues. And we're right on the money and no longer rushing things or dragging things, which really helps with timing,
kind of drill it into your head.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a nice way to do it.
Tell us a little bit about what you're doing currently, what projects you have composed and arranged for. I know we heard this last time, but maybe you're listening to this podcast for the first time, and we would love to be reminded of your work, Derek. And tell me a little bit about how, when you started building tracks for worship, how that played into your producer role and composer role now.
Yeah. Well, first of all, just finished my first feature film as a composer, which was awesome. My buddy Derek Hughes filmed 10 years of his life, 12 years, 10,000 hours of footage, condensed down to a 1.5 hour movie, which is amazing. I got to score the entire thing, which is great. It's like
amazing.
57 songs, I think, when we finished.
How long does that take you? Like, what does that even look like?
He lived in LA at the time, and then I think Louisiana for some of it. For some of it, he's just like, here's what I'm thinking, make something like this. Ted Lasso was an inspiration. Yeah. Marcus Mumford scored that one. Folky, quirky. It's a documentary on a handheld camera, so we wanted it to feel very like home video. Not super quality, professional.
Yeah.
So, which was really fun to dink around on some stuff. But
did you use piano at all for any of that?
I didn't have that piano yet, unfortunately.
Okay. Yeah. Future stuff.
Yeah, for future. Well, for the next thing I'm working on right now.
Okay, awesome.
But I got to score that, and that was super fun. I love how music can tell a story and also make someone feel an emotion. And I know some people have a touchy spot with worship being they say it's not an experience. It shouldn't, like, the worship team shouldn't force your emotion a certain way. But like, God actually uses, he created your body, he created your physical being. So if he's using music, or if he's using someone's words, the way they say it poetically, or if he's using an art form to speak to you, I wouldn't say that is some demonic thing or some crazy thing. Like that, right? God can very well speak to you through a physical feeling. And now, you can't dive in. I know this gets like to the theological side, but like,
go for it,
you can't just be like, oh, I don't feel God today. It's not always like that. And so you can't get too extreme where all you do is feel. You have to know, and that's where faith comes in. But like, God uses music, all that to say. Like, and so that's really cool when it comes into storytelling with composing. But I think it comes into fruition with playing a Bethel song too, because if you're listening to their lyrics and you know your congregation and what they're going through, and you're able to play in a way that lifts and matches the lyrics and matches the tone that you're trying to set, then it just helps create it. If you just show up and you play the chords, then you may not be helping further that agenda. Right. And so that's the importance of practicing. And so anyways, little soapbox moment.
Yeah.
But I'm worked on that composition. Now I'm working on a Bigfoot musical, which is as awesome as it sounds. We're going for like a piano rock, folk rock. So I'm writing a lot of cool folky stuff for that.
That's awesome.
That's fun. I'm working on some projects with a company called 14th Street Music that I started working on during COVID. It's owned by Hans Zimmer and Lorne Balfe, which are like obviously...
Hans Zimmer, I don't know. No,
he's like one of those composers guys. Small. Got to do some TV shows and movies that I got to do vocal work on, which is just super cool. Amazing. As a keys player, it's cool. It's kind of like... Because I receive all the MIDI notes of all the orchestra. So like I can see what he made all the violins play and all the cellos, flugelhorns, and all these things. Because I'm usually singing the notes that they're playing.
Right.
To access or augment that sound. And so
that's so cool.
I get to see how he composed and like how he arranged chords.
Amazing.
And like something that like no one gets to see.
And now just pause for that for a moment, because a lot of people think like the old school way of like scoring something, right? Pen and paper,
right? Or
pencil and paper, and you got your staff, and you're writing all the notes in. But now in modern music, people are at a computer with a MIDI controller, keyboard, and they're playing all the individual notes. And software is, you're quantizing it, and you're making sure it's good. You're tweaking it after you play it, or vice versa. I guess people still do write down on. There's like a pad.
Some
like
people do.
Some people, I know I'd just play it out or something. You probably
Hans Zimmer, he doesn't.
Is that
I
what
don't
he
think
does?
he even write. I mean, by now he might write music, but he just does MIDI for everything. And then he has a team that translates it to the orchestra.
There you go.
And sheet music, and so that's what they do for me. I get the MIDI because I'm working on just like the mock-up, the rough version, and then they send it to the orchestra later in sheet music form, the way they read it.
Right.
So if they sent me sheet music, I would not know what's going on. I would just listen to the notes and write them down.
There you go.
And play it by ear.
Right.
But
is that how you learned, by the way? Did you play by ear at first?
Yeah. I took the lessons for a couple months, which I learned Nashville number system.
There you go. Yeah.
And like basic chord progressions, but then I just like would watch videos and just listen to songs and kind of piece it out by ear.
Absolutely.
And that's how I still play today. I love that.
Going, man. Sorry.
Oh yeah, but like I love doing vocal work for them. I am a producer here in Nashville, so if an artist is looking to put out an album or a single or to songwrite, I've written for TV and film, So like I was working at a company and my job was to compose music for commercials. I think it's awesome if you're a keys player at your church. It's really cool if you get to branch out and do other things with music because it only makes you better.
Oh, absolutely.
At church. Yeah, and I think it's really important to, if you have the opportunity to play music outside of the church, actually really benefits you. Like if you grew up classically, you have a lot of that experience, but if you have the opportunity to be a part of choir or jazz band or show choir, or your buddies in the neighborhood that have a little band just for whatever, all those things that I've done in my past that make no sense to playing Hillsong music.
Right.
It really helps me be more creative and not just play the normal get tired of 1-4-6-5 or whatever it is. When songs can be a little bit more simple on the worship side, CCM side, and a little bit more technical in other genres, it's nice to be able to take some of that knowledge and some of that practice and incorporate it in and be able to give it more of that custom like experience.
Absolutely. So what would you say to someone, maybe they're listening in and they have never made tracks at all, maybe they're using tracks, they want to begin to produce their own tracks for church? How would what would you say to them? What would be your advice for them?
Yeah, I'd say get a DAW. There's free ones. There's Reaper, I think, is a free DAW. We used that in college. Ableton is more expensive and more advanced. It's amazing when you know it. It's a little bit more challenging to know it. But there's basic packages of it, and there's great YouTube videos, so don't be discouraged by doing it. I loved learning it. If you have a Mac, there's Logic, which is like, I think, $200
right
to get started. Some of the Macs may even come with it if you get like a special perk with it. But Logic's great, very user-friendly, runs well with MainStage. But all you need is, like, I just got like a Focusrite, like a Scarlett 2i4, I think. It has 2 inputs, or 2i2, I think they make. Plug that into your computer and then grab your guitar, plug in your 1/4 inch to your guitar, 1/4 inch to your interface, hit record. Play to it. After you're done recording, you can quantize it, which basically just brings it into beat on rhythm. And then that way, you don't record a guitar, bring it in to your click at church, and then it's off beat. You want it to obviously be on beat with that. And the keyboard, same thing. Just plug it in, whether it's the MIDI, and then you turn it into audio. You just convert it. Very easy. You just turn your MIDI into audio, or if you're plugging in an actual piano and playing the audio, you just plug in your 1/4 inches from the back of your piano.
Yeah.
Plug it into the interface, record your own sounds, and then you can pull those sounds in to your live set for your Sunday morning or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And have your own guitars. And I've had some buddies on some gigs, non-church gigs, where they know that I create tracks, and they're like, I just don't want to play that live on guitar. It was like a gig that he just didn't have a lot of time to prepare for.
Yeah.
And he's like, I'm going to play this, because he lived with me. And so he's like, I'm going to play this in your bedroom. You can just dial it in, make it sound awesome. Just put that in the tracks whenever we go to play this concert. And then I'm just going to play the ambient guitar thing.
Oh my gosh. That's
and so like, it's funny because no one knows.
Yeah, there you go.
Unless there's a guitarist in the audience going like,
what's going on?
He's not playing that. But I mean, one person out of 1,000 is going to know that.
Right.
So there's cool things that you can do. I wouldn't always cheat like that, but
of course. I saw Loop Community, their post the other day was, if you could choose one instrument to be in your tracks, what would it be? And someone said lead vocal.
Oof.
It's like, oh well.
I mean, sometimes. No. It's fun to experiment, especially if you're writing for your church. It's so exciting. Like Journey Worship, I was a part of writing and doing a little bit of producing and engineering for their first album. And one of the reasons why they and a lot of churches started writing music is because they wrote it for their church, for their community, that they knew the pains and the struggles, the triumphs, the successes of their church community and what they were trying to achieve. And we're putting songs and melodies to that. And man, it's powerful to sing a song that your church wrote for your church rather than a larger church like Bethel or Hillsong, and you play that song, super impactful, and they're writing biblical truths. But whenever it's like your church's experience, it's like chills.
Absolutely.
It's just another way for God to like speak to people in a way that they're going to hear it. And your worship leader and your pastor, and the pastor would actually write with the team. So
that's awesome.
It was cool because we were able to really, all right, what is God wanting to do with this church in this season? Great, let's write that for this album.
Absolutely.
And then then we would carry that. They still do. They tour and travel, and they like carry that to other states and other churches, and people can rally around some of these concepts and truths. And
right.
And so it's just cool. And all of that, awesome. Starts with just grabbing a computer and an interface and laying down some tracks. And before you know it, it could be played at your church. It could be played at some other random church in
Absolutely,
Ohio,
man.
who just found your song on YouTube or whatever it is.
That's right.
And you won't believe the stories that we've heard too from songs written from that album, that people are like, we heard it, we sang it at our church, and like people came up to us talking about what it meant to them, and we were just like, whoa.
That's incredible, man.
Whenever you're able to be a part of something that's bigger than yourself, there's nothing like it. And that's Absolutely. The beauty of serving on a church team too.
Yes.
Is you're instantly, that is what you're doing. If your heart is positioned to serve God and people, then you're going to be serving something much bigger than yourself by playing piano.
Absolutely.
Every time you step on stage.
100%, man. So if your church is not using tracks, I think there's so many advantages, and one being for preparing as well, and you can solo out that exact part and to build your patches, and then kind of do some reverse engineering. So like I remember when I was building some tracks last year for Loop Community, listening back to the tracks and saying, okay, what did they do to make it sound like that?
Oh yeah.
And recreate it from scratch. You have a piano, get some verb, get some delays, start layering on some other things, other synths, and you play with the diameters of that, and before long you have a patch that's ready to be played.
Or if you're practicing and you want to take out their keys and play yours, and while you're practicing, you can not have like the double thing going on in your ear. Or,
right.
You can solo out, like you said, solo out the keys. I know some worship leaders, that may not use the tracks, they'll grab an acoustic guitar and play the parts and show their hands and just post the YouTube video on private and just send it as a link to their team. And then that way their team has a YouTube link to, or Vimeo, whatever, to watch the guitar. He might play bass, keys, and you can watch their hands. Right. It's definitely a less professional way of doing it, because there are softwares and websites that do this professionally.
Right.
But just if you're lower budget thing and you just have some time to lay down some tracks for your team,
absolutely,
that can be huge. Just to have those videos of examples, this is how to do it.
For sure.
But having the tracks, because you can do all those stems in Planning Center. You can have like piano and all these things separately, and you can just hit play and just listen to what it's doing.
Absolutely.
And that helps a lot with preparing.
And I know so many times I've listened to the recording and I was like, okay, great. The lead line was da 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 da, but really it was ba da ba ba da, and I missed the pickups because with everything in, you couldn't quite hear the pickups or whatever. And you might have thought it was this, but maybe the lead line was going on in conjunction with like the counter melody of the piano.
Right.
So you were actually halfway playing the lead guitar line
and
your line. So like the stems add a lot of clarity as well.
The delays, if there's a ping pong delay versus an eighth note delay, you can't tell if that's the guitar or the piano.
Yeah.
And if you have too much stuff going on, it's going to be weird. And I'd say too, like, get with the guitarist. Like, get with the tracks and work with those, but get with your team. Get to know how your team plays, how your guitarist, what his inspiration is as a guitarist.
Absolutely.
How he plays, where he likes to play, what kind of guitar he likes to play with. There's all these ways that you, like in Nashville, people pick their instruments based on what the song needs, but also what their band is made up of.
Yes.
And so like that's the fun of it. Like you might say worship music is real simple, or they all kind of sound the same, but you can make it whatever you want it to be. You can get with your bassist and your guitarist and jam and try stuff and just get to know each other's personalities and how you play and styles.
Absolutely.
And then you mix tracks in there, just brings it on up.
Absolutely.
Tracks are always meant to accent what the band is doing.
That's good.
It doesn't need to be a concert with the tracks.
Yeah.
And the band just up there as puppets.
Yeah.
Like it definitely has a great place.
Well, thank you guys so much for listening to this podcast. Derek, thank you for being on for a second time. Maybe we can have you on again in the future. And if you have not, please share with your worship leader, your worship keys friends, and hopefully this is beneficial to them. And we can link some things as well in the show notes and in the description for Loop Community Multitracks and Ableton to help you get going with your tracks. I hope this has been a blessing, and we'll see you guys next episode.